Welcome to episode 76 of No Rares Required. It's a weekly podcast focused focused on limit or draft. And every week I like to dive into the color pairs or archetypes specifically. Jeez, whew. The second frontrunner on 17 lands, and also very soon to be overdrafted, I imagine, is Golgari Creatures in the Graveyard. And as usual, we'll start things off with my draft skeleton. And for those listening audio only, my draft skeleton is something that I limit to 17 commons, 5 uncommons, and 1 rare. And the main takeaways are to take advantage that green is definitely the strongest color. So you want to be majority green if you can. Um, Black has really good removal at instant speed, and don't be afraid to push the amount of cards in your late game. So the aggro strategies, specifically like Boros, have been really struggling. The Celestia Mount archetype that I covered yesterday can apply a lot of early pressure and is probably your most likely archetype to bump into that is going to overrun you. But since the other aggro strategies have been struggling, you can take advantage of that fact and kind of extend the amount of cards that you normally would include in the later part of your curve. Also, like Spinewood Paladin has the ability to plot for 4, and so it's not strictly a 5-drop. The Spinewood's Armadillo you can cycle and then bring back from the graveyard with some of your Golgari reanimation. So some of the cards are like very expensive but get discounted. Same thing with like the Hollow Marauder. The more that you can fill your graveyard with creatures, the cheaper that card becomes. So although it may look incredibly greedy, it's not actually that greedy. The one thing that is a little bit of a struggle is the 2-drop slot. There's not a whole lot of 2-drop creatures that I really like to run in this archetype, at least so far. The one exception being the Desperate Bloodseeker, which is the 2/2 that can mill your graveyard. You definitely want to mill yourself, but it's a 2/2 lifelinker, so it gives you some of that life gain. Notably, too, like the Spinewood Paladin gives you 3 life when it enters the battlefield, so that sort of thing of take damage early and then recuperate afterwards, I think is where I would recommend going. So yeah, you also have reanimators in Golgari, which fit into the archetypes kind of Golgari creatures in the graveyard theme, like Back for More and Honest Rutstein. You don't need to lean too heavily into it. As usual, the Golgari space is more of a mid-range with black removal, with a little bit of the graveyard stuff kind of thrown in. So with the bigger picture in mind, oh yeah, also yeah, don't forget that Dance of the Tumbleweeds is something that you can cast for 3, and then it's kind of like casting it for 2 though, because the land that ramps into the battlefield comes into play untapped. So as long as you don't fetch a desert, then you can kind of cast it for 2 on turn 4 and ramp into having turn 5 or turn 6 mana 5 or mana 6 on your next turn. So with that, though, I know it was a lot. Let's dive into the 17 lands data specifically and kind of go over when to take each card. So if this is the first time you're listening or the first time that you're watching, the first thing that I like to do is calculate the total wins created in an archetype. And I do this by taking the average of the game's played win rate and the game in hand win rate on 17 lands, which is a website that tracks Magic the Gathering data. I then subtract the average win rate of all of the users in the archetype and multiply it by the number of games played. And what this allows me to do is look at the cards that are helping the majority of people, regardless of how good they are, in the archetype. So this one I will read. There is going to be several lists that if you are watching on YouTube, then you can read along. Otherwise, if you're listening audio only, sorry, hit me up on Discord or come watch it on YouTube. But Hollow Marauder, Throw from the Saddle, Spinewood's Armadillo, Outcaster Greenblade, Honest Rutstein, Desert's Dew, Patient Naturalist, Consuming Ashes, Back for More, Stubborn Burrowfiend, Festering Gulch, Spinewood's Paladin, Conduit Pylons, Beastbond Outcaster, Clearshot, and Honorary Tumblewag. So as you can see, a lot of really good green cards, some black removal, and you've pretty much got your strategy. And that's kind of what was happening with the green-white deck too, was that it's really good green cards with white removal, right? So next week I will cover something that is kind of leaning into a different strategy, if you will. But the other thing that we can do is look at the total wins destroyed. And so same process, but looking at the cards that have hurt the majority of players. Again, this does not mean that the cards are unplayable. It just means that the majority of people would be better off if they avoided these cards. So again, not going to read the whole list, but I will go over the top three. So the number one trap for Golgari in Outlaws of Thunder Junction is Black Snag Buzzard, and it is a 2/1 flyer for 2 and a black that enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it if a creature died this turn. And you're trying to play really big things that you hope don't die frequently. And even in the archetype where you are trying to get your creatures to die maybe a little bit more with like the Orsov or black white attrition deck, which really should have been called the sacrifice deck. Even there, I haven't been very impressed with the Buzzard. So especially if you have to play it as a 2/1 for 3, you're really not going to be happy about that. Next up, we've got Rooftop Assassin, and that is a 2/2 flash flying lifelinker for 3 and a black. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. Again, this is going to be better, and I think designed for the black-white space where you have 1/1 mercenary tokens. And so then this is a way that you can finish off a big creature. In Golgari, you're the one who has the big creature, and so your big creature shouldn't be just getting chump blocked and leaving something alive after the end of combat. And then we've got the Free Strider Commando, and the problem with this card is it's a decent card. The problem that can occur with the Free Strider Commando is that if it's better if you can plot it and then play it on turn 5 as a 5/5. You are getting pressured pretty heavily in Golgari, and you have better stuff that you're going to be able to do in your turn 4, turn 5, turn 6. So Free Strider Commando isn't necessarily, I mean, it's not that big of a trap card, honestly. I think over time we are also going to see some things shift, and I imagine that this one kind of comes up because as a 3/3 for 3, it's not the end of the world if you end up playing this card, right? But a 3/3 for 3, similar to the 2/2 for 2, does end up getting outclassed. So something to keep in mind that you're kind of playing, at least my experience with the early part of the set is you're playing for the late game, and you're trying to get something to stick on the board that you can then protect with Snakeskin Veil and dodge your opponent's removal, and then run away with the game, right? Like there's a lot of snowballing. There isn't as much of like 22 drops that are all just attacking you and going wide. So your 3-drop is probably a little bit less powerful than you might imagine. So next up, I like to take the wins created and divide them by the number of times that the card was picked, and then graph it against the average taken at, or ATA, and fit the data with a logarithmic regression. And this was a technique that was developed by Carl, aka 2Duck Cubed, and we'll call this value over replacement, or VORP. Calculate the distance of the card's win rate to the fitted line, and we get its VORP value. And we can. This is a good way to see which cards are performing the best at different time points within a draft. So again, not going to read the entire list, but I will go over the top 3. So Bristlebud Farmer is the top performing rare or mythic in Golgari. You get a 5/5 trample for 2 double pip green that when it enters the battlefield creates 2 food tokens. And again, remember part of the Golgari strategy is to regain the life lost early on and then make your opponent's creatures invalid by playing beefier things. So this fits perfectly into that strategy. And then whenever Bristlebud Farmer attacks, you may sacrifice a food. If you do, mill 3 cards, and you may put a permanent card from among those into your hand. You can use it for dig, and it also works at filling your graveyard to make your Marauder better or to give you something spicy to hit with one of your Reanimator spells. The Gitrog Ravenous Ride is a bomb that I've already looked at splashing in like green-white. And you get yourself a 6/5 trample haste for 3, a black, and a green. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice a creature that saddled it and has a saddle of 1. If you do, draw X cards where X, and then put X land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. So there's a little bit of a decision that has to be made about whether or not you want to remove the thing from the board. The longer the game is going, the more likely then that card draw is going to be the determining factor of who wins the game. So especially if you're saddling like a 1/1 or a 2/2 that has become kind of obsolete by your opponent's 3/3 or bigger card on the opposing side, then you definitely want to sacrifice for the card draw. And then the third rare here is Hostile Investigator. Again, things that attack your opponent's hand are better after turn 5. and where it starts to come down to who has the card advantage. And so Golgari, I'm not surprised to see here at number 3, the Hostile Investigator, which is a 4/3 for 3 and a black. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card, and then whenever one or more players discard one or more cards, you investigate. This ability triggers only once each turn. So you're gaining 2 card advantage just by playing this Hostile Investigator. So it almost feels like a 3-for-1 in a single rare. So very good as long as you are doing the kind of late game strategy. Next up, we go and repeat the same process for the value of a replacement for picks 2.5 through 5. And this is going to be the list of, the list of undervalued rares and mostly uncommons. Sometimes a common makes it into this list as well. That's really good. And as you can see, again, more than I could fit on a single list. There's a lot to look for at the beginning of the set. These archetypes have been early performers and are not overdrafted yet. So at the time of listening to this podcast, you might be able to get in for it on that last little bit. So I can highly recommend the Abzan or black, green, white space. Hollow Marauder is a uncommon 4/2 flyer for 6 and a black. And then it costs 1 less for each creature card in your graveyard. And you do have some mill enablers at common. You have 2, 1 in black, which was the Bloodseeker, and the 2/2 lifelink for 2. And then the Eccentric Farmer 2.0, the Patient Naturalist, also mills and helps you find your land. Both of those are also going to put creatures in your graveyard, ideally, and make this cost less. Either way, when it enters the battlefield, any number of target opponents each discard a card. And for each of those opponents who didn't discard a card with mana value 4 or greater, you draw a card. So again, getting that kind of double card advantage on your opponent, very important for this archetype. Spinewood's Armadillo is a 7/7 reach for 4 double pip green with ward 3. It also has the ability to cycle basically for 1, a land cycle. For 1 in a green, you discard it and then search your library for a basic land card or a desert card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle, and you gain 3 life. Again, the 3 life is really good. A lot of times you are going to be just using this to find your land drops so you can hit the larger part of your curve, and then the 3 life helps you stabilize against the early aggression. And then if you top deck it later in the game, you can just play down as a 7/7 reach ward 3. It's a perfectly fine top end threat. And then number 3 is Honest Rutstein. And Honest Rutstein enters the battlefield. You get to return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So you can cycle your Armadillo and then bring it back to your hand with Honest Rutstein, and you didn't really lose any of your late game value. It's a 3/2 for 1, a black and a green, and it makes creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Which just makes it easier to hit into your top end. Excuse me. Next up, we've got the value of a replacement for picks 5 through 8, and this is where you're going to see the bulk of your commons. Every once in a while, you see kind of like an undervalued uncommon slip into this range, and sometimes even a rare. And this list is huge. It almost is. It's like 24 cards or something like that. I mean, it's ridiculous how many options there are that fit into the Golgari strategy well. And I had the similar experience with Celestia. So we'll see. It's possible that both the top performing archetypes are also deep enough to support multiple people on the table. So we shall see. But again, the top 3 for the undervalued uncommons and commons are back for more. So we're still seeing this one go relatively late. It's a instant for 4, a black and a green. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then when you do, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So it's great to pair with your big green beef that you're running in Golgari. All right, so next up on the list is a rare that is very undervalued, and that is Abrupt Decay. Instant for a black and a green. It can't be countered by spells or abilities, and it destroys target non-land permanent with converted mana value 3 or less. One of the things to keep in mind is that many of the O-rings, the Oblivion rings, the enchantment removal, are mana value 3 or less. And you can do this at instant speed to get back a blocker that they had taken from you with an Oblivion ring and get it back into play and block with it and surprise them. So I think that's really what you're looking for, but you can also use it to kill early aggression or one of the early bombs in Celestia. And then Wow, my voice is struggling today. I apologize. Um, the last or the third top common is Desert's Dew. And target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. It gets an additional -1/-1 until end of turn for each desert that you control. Now, when you are in the black space, especially, you're going to be looking to pick up the deserts because they all commit a crime when they enter the battlefield tapped. They deal 1 damage to your opponent. So it's quite common for the black archetypes to have even more deserts than the other archetypes, which are already looking for the deserts to splash busted bombs. So Desert's Dew is really great removal, and it's not uncommon for this to be able to remove something for -4/-4, or even -5/-5. And then last but not least, we get to the value of a replacement for picks 8 and onward, and these are the cards that will wheel, or cards that you can see in your opening pack, and then plan on seeing them again after everybody has passed the pack. So top of the list here, we've got Sandstorm Verge. Again, it's the desert synergies for like Desert's Dew. Anytime that I'm in black, I'm going to be looking to run one copy of the Sandstorm Verge because it does allow you to also remove a creature, right? So target creature can't block this turn, activate only as a sorcery for 3 colorless and tapping the land. So I did have a lethal line in my worst punt ever draft video where I missed using this land for lethal. So it's going to take a little while to remember that you can remove a blocker, and I bet you're going to be able to catch an opponent off guard. Also forgets that you can use Sandstorm Verge to remove something. And then we've got Ambush Gigapede, and this is one that I think a lot of people look at and they're like, "Ooh, 2 toughness for 6. I don't want it." It's more of a removal spell than it is actually a creature. So it has creature synergies. It is a creature, but because it has flash, you can bring it in, and then with 6 power, defensively, this card is amazing, especially if your opponent doesn't see it coming. And so you can use this to trade into something with up to 6 toughness. And then when it enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-2 until end of turn as well. So you can use it to block something that has higher toughness than 6, and make it smaller to trade, or it can just be a built-in 2-for-1, and you can snipe one of your opponent's smaller things, like the Miriam in green-white that's just been hanging back while all of the mounts attack. And then the last card here to kind of wrap things up is Mourner's Surprise. And this is the sort of card that is good in Golgari. It's your ability to get things back that you have milled. Again, this is a card that wheels is something that you can kind of try to get later, and you don't need that many copies. I don't think you should be leaning in too much into the graveyard stuff. I think it's better to kind of have it as plan B while you're focusing on just having really good mid-range threats in green. Either way, it's a sorcery for 1 and a black. Turn up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and you create a 1/1 mercenary creature token. Yeah, so this is a good way to get your armadillo back. So next week, I'll be covering the archetypes that you choose. So place your vote on the poll by clicking the community tab on YouTube. There, with a little bit of a disclaimer, if the data isn't good enough, if we don't have enough of the matches to actually do it, then I'll be doing the second one on the poll, etc. So it looks like it's been a pretty popular set, though, so I don't imagine that we'll run into low data issues. Um, Also, I'm hosting a draft tournament, which I call ACDC, which is the All Star Community Draft Club event, and it will be happening on May 4th. And it is free to enter, but has real cash prizes. So we will be playing best of 3 single elimination and playing Outlaws at Thunder Junction. And the details of how to register are in my Discord. So if you're interested in that, check it out. And as always, remember to click like and subscribe. It is the best way to help support me for free. And you can also join the Discord if you want these VORP guides and for other archetypes as well. I do update them weekly. And again, thank you so much for those who can support me financially. I know not everybody chooses to do so, but those who do, I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much to my YouTube members and Twitch subscribers and Patreons. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I really, really, really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening to my ramblings. I know I stumble. I don't have the perfect presentation. But welcome to my community, and thanks for being a part of my community. Good luck with your games, and good luck getting those trophies.